Inside the Cabaret Room, 1,200 people sat elbow to elbow in a space built for 600, watching comedians who had no idea they were performing the last show of their lives. Meanwhile, 2 floors below, aluminum wiring hummed behind wooden panels, growing hotter by the second. Saturday, May 28th, 1977. Route 27, Southgate, Kentucky. If you couldn't buy a ticket to the Beverly Hills Supper Club, you had to know someone. The club didn't advertise in newspapers anymore. They didn't need to. Word of mouth filled every seat, every night, sometimes twice over. Cars lined the highway for a mile in both directions. Cadillacs, Lincolns, the kind of automobiles that said you'd made it. Inside, chandeliers threw golden light across white linen tables, while 3,000 people, double the building's legal capacity, celebrated Memorial Day weekend in the most glamorous venue between New York and Chicago. But we'll get to what made this place so special, and why that very exclusivity would soon turn fatal. The evening had started perfectly. Men wore wide ties and dinner jackets, their cologne mixing with cigar smoke in the crowded bar area. Women balanced feathered hair over sequined gowns, their perfume mingling with the smell of prime rib and fresh-baked rolls. The Cincinnati Reds had beaten the Dodgers 6-3 that afternoon in Los Angeles, and everyone was in a good mood. Memorial Day weekend. 3 days off work. Summer stretching ahead. In the Zebra Room near the main entrance, a wedding reception clinked champagne glasses. The bride and groom posed for photos beneath crystal chandeliers that had cost Richard Schilling a fortune during the renovations. In the Viennese Room, couples celebrated anniversaries, 25 years, 30 years, lifetimes spent together. In the Garden Room, a retirement party for beloved Wayne schoolteacher Ona Mayfield drew dozens of colleagues. She dedicated her life to educating children. Now it was time to enjoy her golden years. And in the massive Cabaret Room, the crown jewel of the Beverly Hills, singer John Davidson was scheduled to perform at 9:30. The warm-up act, a comedy and ventriloquist duo called Tita and MacDonald, had the crowd laughing. People leaned back in their chairs, sipping cocktails, watching the dummy on Jim MacDonald's knee deliver punchlines. The atmosphere was electric, joyful, safe. Nobody noticed the building was about to become a furnace. Nobody heard the wiring humming in the walls. Nobody felt the heat building between the ceiling tiles and the roof. Meanwhile, in the basement and crawl spaces, something had been wrong for hours, possibly since late afternoon, possibly since that morning. The aluminum wiring that had seemed like such a cost-effective choice during renovations was slowly failing. Connections were loosening. Resistance was building. Heat was accumulating. But we'll understand more about what went wrong when we look at how this building was constructed, and why every choice made during those $3 million renovations would matter tonight. The Beverly Hills Supper Club wasn't always a death trap. In fact, for 50 years it had been a Northern Kentucky institution. The site had operated as a nightclub since 1927, just 7 years after Prohibition began, which meant, of course, it was also a speakeasy. The Ohio River separated Kentucky from Cincinnati, and the towns along that border became infamous for gambling, bootlegging, and organized crime. Dean Martin dealt blackjack there in the 1940s before he became famous. Frank Sinatra performed. Sophie Tucker, Jerry Lewis. The club drew celebrities from Hollywood and gangsters from Cleveland in equal measure, because in those days there wasn't much difference between the two worlds. The mob ran northern Kentucky, and everybody knew it. By 1961, federal pressure forced the club to close for the first time. It sat empty for nearly a decade, slowly rotting. Then, in 1970, Richard Schilling bought the property and poured $3 million into renovations. He reopened it in 1971 as a legitimate dinner theatre. No casino, no mob ties, just good food and big-name entertainment. Or so everyone believed. But later, we'll discover what some survivors still insist really happened that night, and why they think the official story was a lie. The renovated Beverly Hills sprawled across a massive footprint. Multiple additions between 1970 and 1976 had created a confusing maze of rooms. The Zebra Room, the Viennese Room, the Garden Room, service corridors that twisted and turned, dead ends disguised as exits. The Cabaret Room jutted out from the northeastern corner like an afterthought, connected to the rest of the building by narrow hallways that required passing through multiple doors and making sharp turns. If you were trying to escape in a panic, in the dark, with smoke filling your lungs, you'd have almost no chance of finding your way out. None of it had sprinklers. None of it had smoke detectors. None of it had emergency lighting or a fire alarm system. Kentucky law didn't require any of those things in 1977, and the Schilling family had spent their $3 million on chandeliers and velvet curtains instead. They'd created a palace, but they'd built it without any way to warn people when danger came. No bells, no sirens, no automated voice saying, "Please evacuate the building." Just employees running room to room, knocking on doors, hoping they'd reach everyone in time. The walls were covered in highly flammable wood paneling, decorative, beautiful, and deadly. The floors were carpeted with synthetic materials that would produce thick, toxic smoke when they burned. Modern fire codes require materials to be fire-resistant or at least fire-retardant. But in 1977, aesthetics mattered more than safety. Tables were wooden, chairs were wooden, curtains were untreated fabric. Even the ceiling tiles, while technically classified as non-combustible, were surrounded by enough fuel to turn the entire building into kindling. Instead of directing patrons to outside exits, most interior doors led deeper into the building. Hallways funneled people into service areas. Coat closets masqueraded as escape routes. One exit corridor required people to pass through a set of double doors, then through a single door, then make a sharp turn, then proceed through another corridor, then exit through yet another door. In a calm evacuation with plenty of time, this might have been manageable. In a panic, with smoke and darkness, it was a death sentence. The building had been designed for glamour, not safety. And on this particular Saturday night, every design flaw was about to matter. But first, the wedding. Around 8:30, a reception in the Zebra Room near the main entrance began wrapping up early. Guests complained that the room felt uncomfortably warm. Loud popping sounds came from beneath the floor. Probably just pipes, someone suggested. Or maybe the air conditioning unit struggling in the May heat. The high temperature that day had reached 90 degrees, with 60% humidity. Memorial Day weekend in Kentucky, muggy and thick. The wedding party decided to leave ahead of schedule. They filed out through the main entrance around 8:30, grateful to escape the stuffy room. Behind them, the zebra room sat empty, waiting. Nobody realized the popping sounds were wiring connections failing inside the walls. Meanwhile, in the cabaret room at the opposite end of the building, normalcy still reigned. Jim Teeter stood on stage with his ventriloquist dummy, trading jokes with his partner, Jim McDonald. The audience roared. They'd paid $10 per ticket, a significant sum in 1977, and they were getting their money's worth before John Davidson took the stage. 23-year-old Susan Brown sat front row center with her date, Jeff Ruby. She'd dressed in her finest outfit. This was a special night. Around her, 1,200 people crammed into a room rated for 600. Tables and chairs blocked the aisles. People sat on ramps. The fire marshal would later calculate that the cabaret room alone violated capacity limits by at least 300 people, possibly as many as 700. Elsewhere in the club, 18-year-old Walter Bailey cleared tables in his busboy uniform. He'd just graduated from Campbell County High School the week before. This was a summer job, nothing more. He normally didn't work the cabaret room, but tonight was all hands on deck because of the John Davidson show. Walter had no idea he was about to become a hero. At approximately 8:56, 2 waitresses entered the empty zebra room to prepare it for the next event. They immediately smelled smoke. Opening the door to investigate, they discovered smoke pouring from the ceiling. They tried to fight the flames with fire extinguishers, but the fire had already gained too much of a foothold. One waitress told another employee to call the fire department. The call came in at 9:01. 3 minutes of chaos had already elapsed. But here's what nobody understood yet. Opening that door had fed oxygen to a fire that had been smoldering in the ceiling for hours, possibly since the wedding reception had complained about heat at 8:30. Now, it wasn't smoldering anymore. Now, it was consuming. Meanwhile, smoke began drifting down the long corridor toward other banquet rooms. Employees nearest to the zebra room smelled it first and began urging guests to leave. But the building had no fire alarm, no automated warning system, no PA announcement, just employees running room to room, knocking on doors, trying to stay calm while panic built in their chests. In the cabaret room, 1,200 people still laughed at jokes. They had no idea. The fire spread with horrifying speed through the narrow corridor. Wooden wall panels ignited. Carpeting melted and produced thick, black smoke, filled with hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide, both deadly. The flames raced northward along the eastern wall, feeding on everything in their path. Fire investigators would later estimate that once the fire escaped the zebra room, it took between 2 and 5 minutes to reach the cabaret room. 2 to 5 minutes. That's all. Walter Bailey smelled the smoke around 9:04. He'd been clearing tables in a service area when he saw it. Dark smoke rolling through a hallway. His supervisor, Charlie, was busy managing the show. Walter ran to him. "We need to clear the room," Walter said. "There's a fire in the zebra room." Charlie stared at him, didn't respond, just stared. Meanwhile, the smoke grew thicker. Walter could see it now, creeping through the doorway behind Charlie's head. He repeated himself, more urgently this time. "We've got to clear this room, now." Charlie still didn't move. Maybe he didn't believe it. Maybe he was afraid of causing a panic. Maybe he was worried about getting in trouble for interrupting a show that people had paid good money to see. Whatever the reason, he froze. Walter turned and started toward the kitchen to find one of the shilling family members who owned the club. But after 10 steps, he realized he didn't have time. Other employees were already looking for the owners. Every second mattered. He turned back to Charlie and said a third time, "We have to clear the room," and then Walter Bailey did something extraordinary. He walked onto the stage, just walked right up there in his busboy uniform, while Jim Teeter and Jim McDonald were in the middle of their act. The comedians stared at him, confused. The audience thought it was part of the show. Someone laughed. Walter grabbed the microphone from Jim McDonald's hand. "There's a fire in the building," he announced, his voice steady despite his racing heart. He pointed to the exit on the left side of the room. "There's an exit door over there." He pointed to the right. "And there's an exit door over there. You people need to get out of here." Jim Teeter would later remember. He seemed like he was part of the act. The audience hesitated. Some smiled, waiting for the punchline. But Walter's face was dead serious. He handed the microphone back to Jim McDonald and stepped off the stage. "Is this for real?" someone asked. Then people started moving, slowly at first, orderly. But we're about to see how quickly order can collapse. For about 4 or 5 minutes, the evacuation proceeded calmly. The comedians stayed on stage, talking to the audience, trying to keep everyone from panicking. People stood up, gathered their purses and jackets, and began filing toward the exits. 2 exits, technically, one on each side of the room, but one of them had a door closed, leaving only a single door open, and that door opened inward. An inward opening door. That detail would kill dozens of people. Meanwhile, at 9:05, the Southgate Volunteer Fire Department received the call. Fire Chief Dick Riesenberg and his men arrived at the scene by 9:08. 3 minutes. An incredible response time. But smoke was already pouring from the building. Riesenberg set up a command post and ordered his men to attack the fire in the Zebra Room area. Back in the Cabaret Room, Jim Teeter glanced toward the entrance and saw it. A cloud of white smoke rolling through the doorway like morning fog, but moving faster, thicker, deliberate. This went on for about 4 or 5 minutes, Teeter later recalled. And then I noticed at the entrance a cloud of smoke roll in the entranceway. It was white, and it looked like a cloud. And I knew at that point it was not a fire in the kitchen. He dropped the microphone to his side, looked at Jim McDonald. "Jim," he said, quietly, "let's get out of here." And then the lights went out. At 9:10, the electrical system failed. The Cabaret Room plunged into complete darkness. 1,200 people, most of them still inside, suddenly couldn't see their hands in front of their faces. The calm evacuation instantly became chaos. People who had been walking started running. People who had been orderly started shoving. The smoke that had looked white in the light now filled the darkness with invisible poison. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it burning your throat, filling your lungs. Carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide. The synthetic materials in the carpet and walls were releasing toxic gases that killed faster than flames ever could. Susan Brown, sitting front row center with Jeff Ruby, felt the crush of people pressing against her from behind. Everyone was trying to reach the same exit, the only open exit on the right side of the room, the one with the inward opening door. People pushed. The door couldn't open wider. Bodies pressed against bodies. Then a man in a dinner jacket tripped near the exit. He fell. A woman behind him fell on top of him. Then another person, and another. They stacked up like cordwood, sealing the fate of everyone behind them. The margin of error had been razor thin. Now it was gone. John Beach, a 21-year-old lieutenant in the Southgate Volunteer Fire Department, had been inside the Cabaret Room as a patron that night. He'd secured front-row center seats through his friendship with the Schilling family. The worst seats in the room, he would later say, if there was going to be a fire. But his training kicked in. He started pulling people toward the other exit, the one on the left side of the room. Walter Bailey stood at the open exit, reaching in, grabbing people, pulling them through. His hands grasped shirt collars, jacket sleeves, anything he could grip. He pulled and pulled until his arms ached. Some people made it. Others didn't. The bottleneck at the door meant that even with superhuman effort, only a trickle of people could escape. Inside the room, dozens of people ran down hallways that led to dead ends. They thought they'd found exits, but instead, they found coat closets, storage rooms, walls. In the darkness and smoke, there was no way to tell. Some of these people would be found the next morning sitting in chairs, overcome by smoke so suddenly they never stood up. They looked like mannequins, firefighters would later say, like they'd simply fallen asleep. But they hadn't fallen asleep. They'd suffocated. Outside, Fire Chief Riesenberg was coordinating the attack on the Zebra Room fire when one of his men ran up, breathless. "We've got a problem back at the Cabaret Room," the firefighter said. "There are people lying dead and people trapped inside." Riesenberg immediately ordered all available firefighters to focus on rescue operations at the Cabaret Room. "It was a mess," he later recalled. "I saw nothing but pandemonium. I had never seen that many people lying about dead. Our people pulled out a lot of people alive, but the last survivor came out maybe a little before midnight. The rest, after that, were dead." Firefighters pulled people from the exits, many of them crushed against the doors. They found survivors who had been trampled, their ribs broken, their faces bruised. They found bodies stacked 3 and 4 deep at the bottleneck. Some people had died from crushing injuries, others yielded from smoke inhalation, still others is from both. 28-year-old Harold Russell Penwell of Huber Heights had managed to push his wife, Karen, to safety, but he got caught in the crowd and couldn't follow her out. He died a psychological aide at the Veterans Administration Center, a father of 2, a former Vista volunteer who'd earned a Bronze Star in Vietnam. He'd survived war only to die at a dinner theater. Charles Sherwood, 55, from Dayton, also died after pushing his wife to safety. She escaped. He didn't. Instead, he was trampled in the crush of panicking people. 70-year-old Etta Lays from Miamisburg died trying to help 62-year-old Betty Wilson, a handicapped woman who couldn't move quickly enough. Etta stayed with her trying to guide her through the smoke. Neither of them made it out. Meanwhile, John Davidson's music director, Doug Harrow, had made it almost to the exit. Almost. But instead of continuing outside, he turned back. He went up onto the stage and started collecting sheet music from the music stands. He was never seen alive again. By 9:30, the fire had engulfed most of the building. Flames shot through the roof. The hillside behind the club was covered with bodies, some breathing, some not. Emergency responders from miles around descended on the scene. Ambulances lined Route 27. A makeshift morgue was set up at the Fort Thomas Armory, about 1 mile away, but there weren't enough ambulances for the living, let alone hearses for the dead. Survivors were loaded onto buses and given oxygen. Mary Kuntz of Dayton would later remember the ride back. There was no crying, no talking, no sniffling. It was like a morgue on the bus on the way home. Families began arriving at the Fort Thomas Armory, walking through rows of bodies laid out on the floor, searching for loved ones. The scene was medieval in its horror. Some victims were identifiable by their faces, their jewelry, their clothing. Others were charred beyond recognition. And families had to identify them by dental records or wedding rings that had somehow survived the flames. Regina Wren of Kettering regained consciousness, lying on her back with a tag on her toe. "I started to scream, 'I'm not dead,' she later said. The tag was just for identification purposes in the makeshift emergency room, but she'd thought she was in a morgue. The Dayton Automobile Club had sponsored a trip to the Beverly Hills that night. 82 people from the Dayton area had attended together, filling a bus, excited for a special night out. 31 of them died. The club had organized hundreds of trips over the years, ball games, concerts, dinner theaters. This was supposed to be just another fun outing. Instead, it became the worst tragedy in the organization's history. Entire families were wiped out. The Littrell family, Gary Lee, 29, a salesman for auto and truck parts, and his wife Sharon, 26. Both died. They'd been married for just a few years, no children yet. They'd been planning to start a family. Now they'd be buried side by side. The Lyons, James P., 42, president of River Steel Corporation, and his wife, Monica Oe, 42, both died. They left behind a teenage daughter who became an orphan in a single night. 72-year-old Leona S. Long, a retired teacher from Dayton, died. She'd spent her career educating children, shaping young minds, giving back to her community. 67-year-old Alma Schnapp, a clerk at Bergstrom Paper, died. She'd worked her entire adult life, finally approaching retirement age, finally getting to enjoy life a little. 57-year-old Robert Glenn Seaman, owner of Seaman Insurance Agency in Erlanger, died. A business owner, a community member, a person with clients who depended on him. Meanwhile, at Wayne School in the Edgewood City School District, 13 members of a group celebrating teacher Ona Mayfield's retirement had attended the show. All 13 died. Among them, Mary Lou Ittell, an accomplished artist who had attended the Dayton College Art Institute and won numerous awards. She'd married the school superintendent. She was active in art and literature groups across the region. Ann Beer, known as Little Miss Beer to older teachers, was the librarian at Wayne School. She'd just graduated from Miami University in Oxford. This was her first professional position. She was 22 years old. Mabel and Herschel Barker, beloved members of their community, died together. You always had something to laugh about when you were near her, Mabel's lifelong friend Ruby Brown later said. Herschel would just kind of sit back. Mabel took the limelight in the family. They were a great couple. They'd been in that garden club, played cards with friends, lived a full life. Now they were gone. Young engaged couple Brent Crane, 19, and Tammy Kinzer, 18, had been celebrating her high school graduation and their engagement. They'd driven from Waynesville together. Neither of them came home. Brent's father was a former mayor of Waynesville. The entire town was stunned. Robert and Carol Cottengim had a 6.5-year-old daughter named Lee Ann. Carol was pregnant with their second child. Both parents died in the fire. Lee Ann became an orphan, and her unborn sibling never had a chance to live. By midnight, the building was fully engulfed. The roof collapsed around 12:15. Firefighters continued working to control the blaze until approximately 2 in the morning on May 29th. But the fire continued to smolder until May 30th. For 2 days, smoke rose from the ruins, while families searched for missing loved ones. The final death toll, 165 people, over 200 injured. The 7th deadliest nightclub fire in history. The 3rd deadliest in United States history, after the Coconut Grove fire in Boston in 1942 and the Rhythm Club fire in Natchez, Mississippi in 1940. But how did it happen? That's where the story gets complicated. The official investigation concluded that faulty aluminum wiring caused the fire. During the 1960s and 70s, aluminum wiring became popular as a cheaper alternative to copper. Copper prices had skyrocketed, and builders looked for ways to cut costs. Aluminum seemed perfect, lighter, cheaper, easier to work with. But aluminum has a fatal flaw. It expands and contracts more than copper when heated and cooled. Over time, connections can loosen. When connections loosen, electrical resistance increases. When resistance increases, heat builds up. And when heat builds up in a building full of wood and synthetic materials, disaster waits. Investigators found that an overheated connection in the Zebra Room had ignited the wood framing and paneling. The fire smoldered in the walls and ceiling for possibly hours before the wedding party noticed the heat and popping sounds around 8:30. It had been burning slowly, hidden, consuming oxygen inside the wall cavity, getting hotter and hotter. When the waitresses opened the door at 8:56, the sudden influx of oxygen caused a flashover, the moment when a smoldering fire explodes into open flames. It's like opening an oven. The fire had been starved for air. Now it had all the oxygen it needed. The investigators walked through the ruins for days, sifting through ash, examining what remained of the electrical system, photographing everything. They found the connection point. They tested the wiring. They built a timeline. The evidence pointed to one conclusion. This was an accidental fire caused by a building material that had seemed safe, but wasn't. Aluminum wiring would be banned in many jurisdictions after the Beverly Hills fire, but for 165 people, that change came too late. The state of Kentucky conducted an exhaustive investigation. They identified 10 factors that contributed to the loss of life. Overcrowding in the Cabaret Room, tables and chairs jamming the aisles and ramps, no employee training in evacuation and emergency procedures, wood framing and lack of fire separation devices, the decorative paneling that contributed to the spread of fire, no audible alarm system, no sprinkler system, no emergency lighting, the confusing layout of the building, and the inward opening doors at critical exit points. A Campbell County grand jury ruled out arson. Federal courts agreed. In 1984, a federal court jury decided that an overheated connection from outdated aluminum wiring caused the fire. The decision reversed an earlier ruling. General Electric Company, which had manufactured some of the wiring components, settled for $10 million. In total, victims and their families won approximately $43 million in settlements from the club owners, insurance companies, the utility company, and manufacturers of building materials. It was the first disaster case tried as a class action lawsuit, merging 300 claims. Landmark litigation that lasted years. But some people never believed the official story. David Brock was an 18-year-old busboy at the Beverly Hills that night. He survived. But what he saw before the fire started haunted him for decades. He claimed to have witnessed unidentified maintenance men working in the ceiling of one of the party rooms shortly before the fire broke out. Men he'd never seen before, men who weren't regular employees. Knowing the history of northern Kentucky and its mob connections, Brock became convinced the fire was arson. In 2012, he co-wrote a book called The Beverly Hills Supper Club, The Untold Story Behind Kentucky's Worst Tragedy, with authors Robert D. Webster and Thomas McConaughey. The book alleged that the Cleveland Mafia set the fire in retaliation for the Schilling family's refusal to sell the property. The mob shut everything down in the city, Brock said in a 2020 interview. It's all about greed and money. He pointed out that in the 1970s, a major nightclub, casino, strip joint, or restaurant in northern Kentucky burned down almost every year. 70, 71, 72, all the way up to 77, he said. And then all of a sudden, here we go, the biggest, most spectacular of them all. But Brock's allegations were investigated multiple times and never substantiated. In 2008, he and other survivors formed a group called Beverly Hills Survivors for Justice and presented their evidence to Kentucky Governor Steve Beshear. The governor appointed a special review team, which reviewed the allegations with assistance from the Office of Inspector General. They found no evidence of arson. Kentucky. Attorney General Jack Conway ordered a retired state police forensic specialist to return 30 boxes of color slides taken in the days after the fire in 2011. These photos had been in the specialist's personal possession since his retirement. Conway ruled they were public records and must be made available under Kentucky's Open Records Act. But even these photos revealed no evidence of arson. So what really happened? Most experts agree with the official finding. Faulty aluminum wiring, overcrowding, lack of safety features, and poor building design combined to create a perfect storm. But conspiracy theories persist because of northern Kentucky's history. The mob had run the area for decades. They didn't give up power easily. And the Beverly Hills had been their crown jewel. Whether it was an accident or arson, the aftermath changed fire safety codes across America. Kentucky Governor Julian Carroll suspended 3 top Kentucky fire officials, including State Fire Marshal Warren Southworth, after an investigation revealed they'd failed to enforce fire regulations. On November 5, 1977, Carroll named a new state fire marshal and appointed 30 additional inspectors, plus a full-time attorney, for the fire marshal's office. The National Fire Protection Association updated its life safety code. New and existing assembly occupancies, with an occupant load over 300, were now required to have a fire alarm system with voice notification. New assembly occupancies also had to be equipped with automatic sprinkler systems, regardless of building construction type. Emergency lighting became mandatory. Exit doors had to open outward. Clear paths to exits had to be maintained at all times. Richard Witt of the Louisville Courier-Journal was awarded the 1978 Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of the fire and subsequent investigation into the lack of enforcement of state fire codes. His reporting exposed systemic failures in Kentucky's fire safety oversight. The site of the Beverly Hills Supper Club remained undeveloped for over 40 years. The ruins were demolished, but the land sat empty, a haunted memorial to the 165 people who died there. Survivors reported finding burned cocktail trays in the woods decades later. Some believed human remains were still on the property. In 2020, a private developer reached an agreement with the city of Southgate to build a mixed-use development on the site. First responders, families of fire victims, and others filed a lawsuit to halt the project. But they reached an agreement in November 2020. In May 2023, a permanent memorial was inaugurated near the development's northern access road. The area where the Cabaret Room once stood features a memorial fountain honoring the 165 lives lost. For those who were there, the memories never faded. Walter Bailey, the 18-year-old busboy who grabbed the microphone, was credited with saving hundreds of lives. He went on to attend Northern Kentucky University, earned a degree in economics, and built a career in finance in Dallas. But he never forgot that night. In interviews decades later, his voice still carried the weight of survivors' guilt. He saved hundreds, but not everyone. Jim Teeter and Jim McDonald, the comedy duo, both survived. Teeter said in interviews that he often wondered what would have happened if they'd taken Walter Bailey's warning less seriously, if they'd tried to calm the audience longer. Those few minutes of orderly evacuation before the lights went out saved dozens of lives, but the timing had been razor thin. John Davidson, the headliner who never performed that night, lost his music director. He gave interviews about the fire for years afterward, always mentioning Doug Harrow, the man who went back for sheet music. He was dedicated to his craft, Davidson said. But I wish he'd been more dedicated to his life. Jeff Ruby, the young entrepreneur who'd taken Susan Brown on a front-row center date, went on to become a successful restaurateur. He built a restaurant empire across the Midwest. But in every restaurant he opened, he obsessed over fire safety. Multiple exits, sprinkler systems, emergency lighting. He'd walk into a room and immediately locate every exit. He wasn't alone. Thousands of survivors developed similar habits. Every time I walk into a room now for a concert, a movie, or a restaurant, I look to see where the exit is, one survivor said. That's the first thing I do. It became a generation's reflex. If you were at the Beverly Hills, or If you knew someone who was, you never entered a building the same way again. Fire Chief Dick Riesenberg carried the weight of that night for the rest of his career. He'd arrived in 3 minutes. His men had worked tirelessly, but 165 people still died. In interviews, he spoke carefully, professionally, about the technical aspects of the fire, but his eyes told a different story. He'd seen things that night that no human should see. Bodies stacked at doors. People who died sitting in their chairs. Families that would never be whole again. The town of Southgate never recovered its identity. Before the fire, it was a typical American town of fewer than 4,000 people. After the fire, the mayor gave a memorial speech. "We will never again be the same typical American town. The nation will remember and associate Southgate, Kentucky, with smoke, fire, and death." He was right. Even today, mention Southgate to anyone over 50 in the Cincinnati area, and they'll immediately think of the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire. Memorial Day weekend, 1977, should have been a celebration. The weather was warm. The war in Vietnam was over. The country was healing. People were dressing up, going out, enjoying life. 3,000 people thought they were having the night of their lives at the most exclusive club in the region. Instead, 165 of them never came home. The Beverly Hills Supper Club. Fire stands as a reminder of how quickly celebration can turn to tragedy, how thin the margin between life and death can be, how crucial safety regulations are, even when they seem like bureaucratic annoyances. It changed building codes across America. It changed how firefighters train for mass casualty events. It changed how club owners think about capacity limits. But most of all, it changed the survivors. They carry May 28th, 1977 with them every day. They see the faces of friends who didn't make it out. They hear the screams in quiet moments. They smell smoke where there is none. They check for exits everywhere they go. 48 years later, the memorial fountain flows at the site where the Cabaret Room once stood. Water cascades over stone, engraved with 165 names. Families still visit. They leave flowers. They touch the names of loved ones. They remember. Because forgetting would be the final tragedy. The people who died at the Beverly Hills Supper Club deserve to be remembered. Not just as statistics, not just as victims, but as individuals who went out on a Saturday night and never came home. Teachers, veterans, newlyweds, engaged couples, mothers and fathers. People celebrating retirement, graduation, weddings, life itself. They deserve to be remembered for the heroes too. Walter Bailey, who grabbed a microphone. Harold Penwell, who pushed his wife to safety. Charles Sherwood, who did the same. Etta Lace, who tried to help a stranger. The firefighters who pulled people from the flames. The employees who ran through smoke to warn others. And they deserve to be remembered as a warning that safety regulations are written in blood. That capacity limits exist for a reason, that emergency exits must be clear and accessible, that fire alarms and sprinklers aren't optional luxuries, that cutting corners on safety to save money or maximize profit can cost lives. The Beverly Hills Supper Club was the showplace of the nation. the most glamorous venue in the Midwest, the place everyone wanted to be. But on May 28th, 1977, it became something else entirely. A furnace, a death trap, a cautionary tale, and the lesson is simple. When you lock the doors to keep people out, you'd better make damn sure they can get out when something goes wrong. Because at the Beverly Hills Supper Club, they couldn't. And 165 people paid the price.